Chapter 18, Voodoo in the Skillet. Along about September, when the first tart whisper of coming autumn crisped the breeze and the dogs began to stir restlessly, I always seemed to get hungrier than usual. As Havelia Babcock says, my health is better in November, and my stomach starts to grumble a bit more vociferously when October beckons. It is not that summer's butter beans and sweet corn are inferior to a pumpkin, even with frost on it, or that the staunch line of rich red-fleshed tomatoes and an infinite variety of seafood are not nourishing fare, but they lack the tang of an autumn, the crackling authority of anything that is flavored with wood smoke. There is still an excitement to camp cookery that cannot be counterfeited by all the backyard barbecues in the world. If I had it all to do over again, the old man once said, I would like to be born black and be a professional hunting cook. Seems to me that, apart from being a dead pig in the sunshine, there ain't a healthier way to work your way through life, and it's a heap more practical than being a pioneer. They may possibly have disappeared from the scene, but there used to be a considerable fraternity of outdoor professional chefs. They worked only when fishing and hunting were at their height, which is to say about 6 months a year. They laid up the other 6 months and lived off their fat. The specialist was by no means a servant. His cook fire gave him as much professional recognition as attaches to a good guide in Canada or a professional hunter in Africa. He was an autocrat of his outdoor kitchen, brooked no interference, took no advice, and was likely to be severely critical of the hunting or fishing techniques of his clients. The closest modern parallel is the seasoned African safari cook, like my Ali or Mawindi of recent experience. Ali is a coastal Swahili, a good part Arab, and a man I would choose to be my father if I needed a spare. He's as wrinkled as a prune, a sort of medium brown in complexion, and I should say is possibly the best cook for my taste in the world. Mawindi, who is a Wakamba, has been around so long that he was second boy when Philip Percival first took Ernest Hemingway safaring about 30 years ago. These are Africans of great dignity, professionally grave and almost winsomely charming, as opposed to that rogue Juma, who looks like a carbon of Mickey Rooney and is a good kind of priest. He is currently wearing a new set of gold front teeth, shamelessly wheedled out of me on the last expedition. This was his due, he said, because when he went methodically through my box and I had brought along nothing worth stealing this trip, at last count Juma owned more of my clothes than I did. But whether they came from Mombasa or Machakos or Southport, North Carolina, these outdoor African chefs have a special thing in common. They can take a tin cracker box, a shovel, and a heap of glowing coals and turn out a meal to make a French chef commit suicide out of sheer envy. I don't know how they do it, but they do. My old ally, for instance, uses heaps of coal of varying intensity of heat depending on what he's cooking. He bakes a crusty light golden loaf in one cracker tin by heaping the coals on its top. He sears a piece of meat on a hot flame, then moves it to a back burner of damped coals while he broils a fowl on another fire. Cooks a game leg in rich soup on a third, boils spaghetti on a fourth, or still uses another to render a chunk of fresh killed eland suitably tender for tomorrow's broiling. My wife is a good cook with a lot of experience and a great deal of imagination, but she is only one try at reforming Ally's kitchen techniques. When his version of her mother's molasses cum bacon cum onion special beans turned out better than the old lady's, she tossed in her chef's cap and left Ally to his own devices in the screaming middle of Tanganyika. Ally gives you breast of guinea under glass and has been known to produce a souffle so light that you have to put weights on it to hold it on the table. When I was a kid in Carolina, we had a succession of Allys. One, I remember, was a paroled murderer, but what he did with fresh-killed venison chops over hickory coals was worthy of official pardon. He could also stick an unplucked duck into a clay mold and cook it until the clay cracked. He peeled off the clay, which took the feathers with it. He did the same thing with a fish, and its scales came off with the clay. I don't know the details of this gentleman's fit of ill temper that sent him to the jug for a spell, but given enough corn whiskey and a free hand, he could turn an aged shite poke into a symphony. Several things distinguish cooks who worked only for sporting gentlemen. I never knew one, not one, who didn't operate in a vapor of alcohol, except, of course, the Swahilis, who are Muslim and are not supposed to use booze. But mainly the drunker they got off hand-hewed corn or home-stomped wine, the better they cooked. Another thing, they couldn't stand anybody in their alfresco kitchens. You went back to the cook fire and made some mild recommendation about the quail stew or rabbit ragout, and you got a less than mild admonition to confine your energies to missing fewer quail or to bringing home a better brand of money. And there were generally some pouting cracks such as, "My mouth watering for some deer liver, but I noticed ain't nobody fetched in no tender spiked buck yet. How y'all gentlemen expect me to cook what you ain't got is a hard put to say." Properly chastened, you went out and clobbered anything with horns, even a stray goat, just to keep the cook from sticking out his underlip. If you were hunting anywhere at all close to salt water, oysters always figured heavily on the menu. Oysters and any fish, like a blue or a mackerel, that was fat enough to sputter his own grease into the low blue-tongued broiling fire. The oysters got roasted in a kelp blanket, and sometimes, when I think about those oysters, drowned in a peppered sea of heat-bubbling butter, I just want to sit right down and cry. There'd be a fat mackerel, his hide cracked from the heat, much of his surplus oil dissipating in his own cremation, falling apart from the sheer thoroughness of his preparation, with only a sprinkle of pepper and a light douse of vinegar. Brother, pass the plate. Somehow the coffee made from leaf-dyed branch water had an extra special tang, and enough smoke got mixed up in the eggs and bacon, not these silly slim strips of bacon, but a decent hunk of hog meat, to make an adventure of it, and a sow belly that flavored the beans had enough character to transmute a string bean into an art form. Possibly the idea of a possum may revolt you, because he's certainly a filthy beast and horrid to look at, but a Mose or an Ike had a certain talent for bassoning the rendered down marsupial with enough sweet taters and onions to make an innocent believe that he was eating his way across France. In the same vein, I shunned warthog for a time until the white hunter Don Bosfield conned me into trying a young one. It makes American pork repulsive by comparison. Since the African warthog is an active animal, it doesn't run to fat, so the meat is as lean as fowl. I would like to insert here that I have eaten enough elephant's heart and found it nothing much but rubbery and tough. The foot tastes like pickled pig's feet and has the same gristly cellular structure. And when once I presented my idea of how to grill a kudu fillet to Allie, when the hyenas spurn their refuse, but roast grasshoppers ain't bad, tastes kind of like shrimps in batter. I think that the bread the old-timey hunting cooks used to produce was possibly the best flour or cornmeal combination I ever encountered. There was a large, plum-black gentleman named Joe who worked for the late Paul Dooley in a snake-infested camp in the Everglades, and he could make a golden cornbread on an open fire, a cornbread that had the consistency of cake. Joe was kind of handy with hush puppies, too, and when you scraped off the ash, they went away in a bite. A hush puppy, which ain't nothing but a hoe cake, dipped into the mud and oyster-flavored butter in which the oyster is bathed, is kind of a gastronomic experience that is too good for most people and should be less licensed. Joe, like most hunting cooks, was a lover of extreme scope, but instead of orchids, he took rabbits to his lady's fair. We always went hunting at Grapefruit Gulch with a stern admonition from Joe to assassinate a mess of rabbits, because he had his eye on that fat gal over the hill. One day Paul and I, with Lee Hills and Walker Stone, the latter two sort of disreputable newspaper executives went out in the swamp buggy and put the hounds into an Everglades wild boar. They fetched him squealing by the ears, and we shoved him, he was only a shoat really, into one of the boxes in the back of the buggy. When we went back to camp and told Joe that we'd bad luck with the rabbits, but the dogs had caught one alive, and he was in the beverage box in the back of the truck, Joe went out to retrieve his long-eared calling card and came back stricken, sore, and almost gray. I opened that box, and the rabbit roar at me, Joe said. I don't want no truck with no roaring rabbits. Joe had a hard time out of us ruffians. Dooley took him to the Bahamas on his boat one time, and the weather was awful. Joe got so sick that his normal purple coloration doubled. Later he said to me, I swears for God, the three other responsible witnesses, I ain't never going to see with Mr. Dooley again. Joe's off-duty hours were devoted to romance, although in the Bahamas we had no rabbits to serve as entree, but shortly after he recovered from his Maldemir, a certain covey of comely maids were in evidence. I asked Joe how he arranged this collection of beauty so swiftly. I tells you, Mr. Bob, he said, he's so simple. I just goes ashore and makes a play for the old ugly gals, and in no time the word just spreads. The world is so full of nobility and stupidity and other idioties these days that I have almost forgotten the wonderful simplicity of a hickory chip fire smell, the tiny beacon of light presaging a massive breakfast sandwich of hot egg and bacon on fat fried bread, in a rich African voice singing something like Go Down Moses, and in dogs whimpering with eagerness to be off, the coffee bubbling, browning invitingly, the smell of greased gun, and the last star dropping in the sky. The whole promise of a great day was before you, the dew was wet, and so were the noses on the dogs, and any one of 50 Joes was going to do something miraculous with the skillet by the time you'd come home, dead tired but almost blissfully, impossibly happy. You know, I think the old man had a good idea. I can't wait to be reborn black, but I think I'll get myself a job with some rich folks as a fishing cook and lay down this weary writing load.